blood still stained Sarah's hands from saving the Apache warrior who had slaughtered 4 bandits to protect her newborn triplets. Now 50 painted warriors surrounded her cabin, weapons raised, demanding justice for a debt she didn't understand but would soon pay with her heart. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered porch of the Mitchell homestead, its golden light softening the harsh edges of the rough-hewn timber that had been Sarah's home for the past 2 years. A delicate breeze swept through the valley, carrying with it the scent of sage and earth, a fleeting respite from the merciless heat that had baked the land all day. Inside the modest cabin, Sarah Mitchell rocked slowly in the chair her husband had crafted for her as a wedding gift, her slender frame exhausted beyond words. 3 small bundles lay nestled in a large bassinet beside her, their tiny faces pink and peaceful in sleep. Her week-old triplets, 2 boys and a girl, were miracles that had arrived just 3 months after Thomas had been laid to rest beneath the juniper tree on the hill. "How will I keep you safe?" she whispered, her voice breaking the silence that had become her constant companion. "How will I raise you alone in this wild place?" Sarah was only 26, but grief and hardship had etched fine lines around her once bright blue eyes. Her golden hair, usually fastened in a neat braid, hung loose and unkempt down her back. The childbirth had been difficult, leaving her weakened and vulnerable at a time when strength was what she needed most. Thomas had succumbed to fever in the early spring, leaving her with a half-built homestead, dwindling supplies, and the promise of children he would never meet. Their closest neighbors were 5 miles away, and the small settlement of Willow Creek lay nearly 15 miles beyond that. She had been alone when her labor began, alone when she brought her 3 children into the world, and alone every night since as she fought to keep them fed and warm. "Your father would have loved you so," she told them as one of the boys, little James, stirred in his sleep. "He would have built you cradles of pine and told you stories of the East while you fell asleep." A single tear tracked down her cheek, but she brushed it away quickly. Tears were a luxury she could not afford, not when every ounce of strength was needed for survival. The cow needed milking, the garden needed tending, and winter would come before she knew it. Already, the nights carried a chill that warned of the seasons changing. Sarah had managed to stockpile some supplies, flour, salt, coffee, and sugar, but it wouldn't last until spring. She had the cow for milk, chickens for eggs, and the garden Thomas had started, but it wasn't enough, not for 4 mouths. As she rocked, a sound from outside broke her reverie, the distant thunder of hooves against the hard-packed earth. Visitors were rare in this remote stretch of territory, and seldom brought good news. Sarah's heart quickened as she rose from the chair, moving to the window with practiced quiet. Through the wavy glass, she could make out the approaching riders, 5 men on horseback, dust billowing behind them. They weren't soldiers. Their clothing was too mismatched, their horses too varied. Nor were they Apache or Navajo. These men rode with the arrogant posture of those who feared nothing in these lands, bandits, outlaws, men who preyed on the vulnerable. Fear seized her throat, but panic would not save her children. Sarah moved with desperate efficiency, gathering her babies from their bassinet. Little Mary whimpered as she was disturbed, but Sarah soothed her with soft words as she carried all 3 to the root cellar beneath the kitchen floor. "Hush now, my loves," she whispered, laying them gently on a blanket in the cool darkness. Not a sound. She covered them with another blanket, tucking it around their tiny forms. The cellar was shallow, barely 5 feet deep, but it was their only hope. If the men were simply looking to steal, perhaps they would take what they wanted and leave without searching too thoroughly. Sarah closed the trapdoor, covering it with the small rug, and rushed to the cabinet where Thomas had kept his rifle. It was loaded. She had made sure of that after he died, but she had only fired it a handful of times. Would her hands remain steady if she needed to use it? Would she be able to protect her children if these men meant them harm? The riders were close now. She could hear their voices, rough and eager, as they approached the cabin. "Looks empty enough," one called out. "No smoke from the chimney." "Check the barn first," another commanded. "Torn if there's livestock. Someone's around." Sarah's pulse pounded in her ears as she positioned herself behind the door, rifle clutched in trembling hands. She thought of her babies hidden below, of all they had already lost, of all she had endured to bring them into this world. A fierce resolve hardened within her. "I will not let them take you from me," she vowed silently. "I will not let them take another thing that I love." Outside, boots hit the ground as the men dismounted. Sarah heard them spreading out, checking the barn, the chicken coop, the small corral where her 2 horses grazed. It would only be moments before they tried the cabin door. The floorboards of the porch creaked under heavy footsteps. Sarah Mitchell took a deep breath, steadied the rifle against her shoulder, and prepared to face whatever came through that door. The door flew open with a splintering crack, torn from its upper hinge by a booted foot. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger, but she hesitated, a moment's weakness that cost her dearly. A man with a ragged beard and eyes like chips of ice spotted her before she could squeeze the trigger. Well, he drawled, his voice thick with malice. "Looks like this place ain't empty after all." He lunged with surprising speed, knocking the rifle from her hands before she could fire. Sarah cried out, more in rage than fear, as the weapon clattered to the floor. The man grabbed her by the hair, yanking her forward with cruel efficiency. "Got a live one in here, boys," he called over his shoulder, his breath hot and sour against her face. "And she's a pretty little thing too." 3 more men entered the cabin, their faces weathered by sun and hardship, their eyes gleaming with dangerous intent. The leader, the one who held her, was tall and lean, with a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He wore a dusty black coat despite the heat, and a silver-handled revolver hung at his hip. "Please," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Take what you want and leave." "I have nothing of value here," the scarred man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Oh, I think you've got plenty worth taking." His gaze raked over her with undisguised hunger. One of the others, a stocky man with a red neckerchief, began rummaging through her meager supplies, tossing flour and sugar onto the floor with careless disregard. "Not much here, Blackwood," he reported. "Some food, bit of ammunition." "No cash that I can find." The leader, Blackwood, tightened his grip on Sarah's hair. "Where's your husband, woman? No one lives out here alone." "He's dead," Sarah answered, her mind racing. If they believed she was truly alone, they might search more thoroughly. If they thought help might arrive, perhaps they would leave sooner. But the ranch hands will be back any minute. "They rode to town for supplies." Blackwood's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You're lying. Ain't no ranch hands. This place is barely standing." A third man, thin as a rail with yellowed teeth, emerged from the bedroom. "Nothing in there, except some baby things, cradle and such." Sarah's blood ran cold. Little Mary chose that moment to let out a thin, plaintive cry from beneath the floor. The sound, though faint, was unmistakable in the sudden silence that followed. Blackwood's lips curved into a slow, cruel smile. "Well now, what do we have here?" He shoved Sarah roughly toward the red neckerchief man, who caught her with bruising hands. "Find that baby," Blackwood ordered the thin man. Wood. Sounds like it's under the floor somewhere. "No!" Sarah fought with sudden, desperate strength, twisting free of her captor and lunging for Blackwood. Her nails raked across his scarred face, drawing blood before the back of his hand sent her crashing to the floor. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard the thin man call out, "Found a trap door under this rug! Blackwood!" Sarah struggled to her knees, blood trickling from her split lip. "Oh, please," she begged, all pretense of strength abandoned. "They're just newborns. Please don't hurt my babies." Blackwood wiped the blood from his cheek, his cold eyes now burning with rage. "Newborns? More than one?" He reached for his revolver. "You've caused enough trouble, woman. We'll take what we want, and then—" He never finished his sentence. A shadow darkened the doorway, followed by a sound that froze every man in the room, the distinctive click of a rifle hammer being pulled back. In the threshold stood a figure unlike any Sarah had ever seen, tall and powerfully built. He wore buckskin leggings and a vest of the same material over his bare chest. His black hair was pulled back from a face marked with red and white paint, stark lines that accentuated features carved from stone. The rifle in his hands was trained on Blackwood with unwavering precision, an Apache warrior here in her cabin. Sarah's mind struggled to make sense of his presence as the outlaws stood paralyzed with shock. Was this death coming in another form, or something else entirely? Step away from the woman. The warrior's voice was deep, his English accented but clear. His dark eyes, glittering with controlled fury, moved from Blackwood to the thin man who stood frozen by the trapdoor. Blackwood recovered first, his hand still on his revolver. "This ain't your business, Indian. Best ride on before my boys put you down." The warrior's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "The woman and her children will not be harmed." Each word was pronounced with lethal certainty. "And you have spilled enough innocent blood." Understanding dawned on Sarah then. This warrior wasn't here by chance. He had been tracking these men, hunting them for some purpose of his own. "You're outnumbered, redskin," Blackwood sneered, though Sarah noticed a tremor in his voice. 4 against 1. The Apache's mouth curved slightly, not in a smile, but something far more terrifying. "No," he said softly. 4 against death, and then everything exploded into violence. The world shattered into fragments of sound and fury. Blackwood drew his revolver with practiced speed, but the Apache warrior was already moving, diving to the side as the shot rang out. The bullet splintered the doorframe where he had stood moments before. In one fluid motion, the warrior rolled and fired his rifle. The man with the red neckerchief screamed, clutching his chest as he crumpled to the floor. Sarah scrambled toward the trapdoor, her only thought to reach her children, to shield them from the violence erupting around her. The thin man grabbed for her ankle, his yellow teeth bared in a snarl. She kicked hard, connecting with his jaw, sending him reeling backward. The fourth outlaw, a burly man who had been silent until now, charged at the Apache with a Bowie knife gleaming in his hand. The warrior met him halfway, having abandoned his rifle after the single shot. He caught the man's wrist, stopping the knife inches from his throat. For a moment, they stood locked in a contest of strength, muscles straining, neither yielding. Then the Apache twisted sharply, the crack of breaking bone audible even over the chaos. The knife clattered to the floor as the outlaw howled in pain. Blackwood fired again, and this time his aim was true. The Apache grunted as the bullet tore through his left shoulder, but he did not fall. Instead, he swept up the fallen knife and hurled it with his good arm. The blade embedded itself in Blackwood's gun hand, forcing him to drop the revolver with a cry of rage and agony. Sarah reached the trapdoor, yanking it open to reveal her 3 infants, miraculously still sleeping through the din of battle. Mary had fallen silent again, as if sensing the danger above. Sarah gathered them into her arms, retreating to the farthest corner of the cabin, her body curled protectively around their small forms. The thin man had recovered, producing a pistol from his waistband. He fired wildly, missing the Apache but sending splinters flying as the bullet struck the wooden table. The warrior closed the distance between them with startling speed, driving his fist into the outlaw's throat with such force that the man dropped without another sound, clutching his crushed windpipe as he suffocated. The burly man, despite his broken wrist, charged again, this time tackling the Apache around the waist. They crashed into the kitchen shelves, sending Sarah's few dishes shattering to the floor. The warrior's wounded shoulder slammed against the wall, and pain flashed across his painted features. But there was no fear in his eyes, only a terrible focus. With his good arm, he reached to his waist and drew a stone knife, its edge honed to razor sharpness. The blade rose and fell in one swift arc. The burly outlaw's eyes widened in shock, then emptied as he slid to the floor, leaving a smear of crimson against the wall. Only Blackwood remained standing, having retrieved his revolver with his uninjured hand. He and the Apache faced each other in the center of the cabin, both wounded, both deadly. "You're bleeding out, Indian," Blackwood taunted, though fear had crept into his voice. "You won't leave this cabin alive." The warrior's chest rose and fell with controlled breaths. Blood soaked the left side of his buckskin vest, but his gaze never wavered. "Neither will you," he replied simply. They moved simultaneously, Blackwood raising his gun, the warrior launching forward in a final, desperate attack. 2 shots exploded in the confined space, deafening in their intensity. Sarah cried out, turning her body to shield her babies from the gunfire. When she dared to look again, both men were on the floor. Blackwood lay motionless, a spreading stain on his chest where the Apache's last shot had found its mark. The warrior himself was on one knee, a new wound in his side, joining the one in his shoulder. His breathing was labored, but his eyes, when they met Sarah's, were clear and steady. "Are your children safe?" he asked between ragged breaths. Sarah nodded, unable to speak through the knot of terror and gratitude in her throat. The warrior's mouth twitched in what might have been satisfaction. Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed to the blood-stained floorboards. For several heartbeats, Sarah remained frozen, her babies clutched to her chest. The cabin, so recently filled with violence and noise, was suddenly, terribly silent. 4 dead outlaws lay scattered across her home, and the man who had saved her, saved them all, might soon join them. She gently placed her children back in the relative safety of the root cellar, covering them with blankets. "I'll be right back, my loves," she whispered. "Stay quiet for Mama." With trembling legs, Sarah approached the fallen warrior. Blood pooled beneath him, too much blood. She knelt beside him, hesitantly reaching out to touch his neck. A pulse beat there, faint but persistent. He had come from nowhere, this stranger with painted face and deadly skill. He had fought like a force of nature, unstoppable and elemental. He had asked about her children with his dying breath. Sarah made her decision then, though she knew what it might cost her if others discovered she had aided an Apache. With strength born of desperation, she dragged the unconscious warrior toward her bedroom, leaving a trail of blood across the wooden floor. She couldn't lift him onto the bed, but she could make him as comfortable as possible on the floor beside it. As she tore strips from her spare sheets for bandages, she studied his face. Beneath the war paint, she could see that he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30 at most. His features were strong, his brow noble even in unconsciousness. "Don't you die on me," she murmured as she began to clean his wounds. "Not after what you just did, not after saving us." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Sarah worked through the gathering darkness, pausing only to check on her babies and light a lamp. As she pressed a cloth against the warrior's side to slow the bleeding, his eyelids fluttered. For an instant, their gazes locked, her blue eyes wide with concern, his dark ones confused and pain-filled. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound emerged before unconsciousness reclaimed him. Sarah Mitchell, alone on the frontier with 3 newborns and a gravely wounded Apache warrior, squared her shoulders and continued her work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight her focus was singular. Keep everyone under her roof alive until dawn. Dawn crept through the cabin windows, illuminating the aftermath of violence. Sarah had worked through the night, alternating between tending to the warrior's wounds and caring for her hungry infants. Her back ached, her hands were stained with blood, and exhaustion pulled at her like quicksand. But the Apache was still breathing, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that had grown steadier as the hours passed. She had removed the bullets, her fingers guided by faint memories of watching Thomas assist the town doctor once after a hunting accident. The warrior had not stirred during her crude surgery, not even when she'd poured precious whiskey over the wounds to cleanse them. That stillness had frightened her more than any resistance would have. Now, in the pale morning light, Sarah heated water on the stove for fresh bandages. The triplets lay in their bassinet, mercifully asleep after feeding. She had dragged the bodies of the outlaws outside during the night, unable to bear their presence in her home, though moving them had reopened her split lip and left new bruises on her already taxed body. They would need proper burial, but that was a problem for later. A sound from the bedroom drew her attention, a soft groan, barely audible. Sarah grabbed the rifle she had retrieved from the floor and approached cautiously. The warrior was awake, his dark eyes alert despite the pain evident in the tightness of his jaw. "Water!" he rasped, his voice dry as the desert outside. Sarah hesitated only a moment before setting the rifle aside and fetching a cup. She helped him raise his head, bringing the water to his parched lips. He drank slowly, with discipline, though she sensed his thirst was enormous. "Thank you," he said when he had finished. His gaze traveled the room, assessing before returning to her face. "Your children?" "They're safe," Sarah answered, surprised by the question. "All 3 of them." Something like satisfaction crossed his features. He tried to sit up, then fell back with a hiss of pain. "Don't move," she admonished. "You've lost a lot of blood. The bullet in your shoulder went clean through, but the one in your side was deep." The warrior regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Why do you help me, white woman? Most would have let me die or finished what the bullets started." Sarah sat back on her heels, considering her answer. Why indeed? By all the rules of the frontier, this man was her enemy. Apache raids on settlements were common enough to fill every white woman's heart with dread. "Yet you saved my life," she said simply, "and my children's lives. I won't repay that debt with cruelty." He studied her for a long moment, as if searching for deceit in her words. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. "I am called Red Sky," he offered, each word measured and precise. "Sarah Mitchell," she responded. Then, because it seemed important to know, she asked, "Why were you tracking those men?" A shadow crossed Red Sky's face, the pain in his eyes no longer merely physical. "The one with the scar, Blackwood. He and his men attacked our hunting party 3 moons ago." They killed my brother. His hand tightened into a fist at his side. They took his scalp as a trophy. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, sickened but not surprised. Such atrocities were committed by both sides in the endless cycle of violence that plagued the territory. "I am sorry for your loss," she said softly. Red Sky's expression remained impassive, but something in his gaze shifted. "You have also known grief," he observed. "The man who built this place, your husband." Sarah nodded, unprepared for the sudden tightness in her throat. "Thomas died of fever this spring." "Before the babies were born." Red Sky was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You are strong, Sarah Mitchell, to birth 3 children alone and to fight as you did yesterday. My people would call you a warrior mother." The unexpected praise warmed her, though she shook her head. "I wasn't very effective against Blackwood and his men if you hadn't come." "But I did," he said simply. "And the Great Spirit guided my path." One of the triplets, little Mary, began to fuss in the other room. Sarah rose, her muscles protesting the movement. "I need to tend to my daughter." Red Sky nodded, his eyes growing heavy despite his efforts to remain alert. "Go, I will rest." When Sarah returned with Mary, cradled against her chest, the warrior had drifted back to sleep. She changed his bandages carefully, noting with relief that the wounds showed no immediate signs of infection. His fever was mild, a good sign. With proper care, he might recover. As she worked, Sarah found herself studying his face. Without the war paint washed away during her ministrations, Red Sky's features were noble and striking. A scar ran along his jawline, old and white against his copper skin. His black hair, freed from its ties, spilled across the makeshift pillow she had placed beneath his head. This man had killed without hesitation to protect her and her children, strangers to him, members of a race that had brought nothing but suffering to his people. The complexity of that truth settled into her heart, challenging everything she had been taught about the savage Apaches. Days passed in a blur of feeding infants, changing bandages, and snatching moments of sleep whenever possible. Red Sky regained strength gradually, able to sit up by the 3rd day, though the effort left him pale and sweating. They spoke little, but the silences between them grew comfortable rather than strained. On the morning of the 4th day, Sarah was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when Red Sky appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch fashioned from a broken broom handle. "You should not be up," she chided, rushing to support him before his trembling legs gave way. "Listen," he commanded, his voice urgent. "They're coming." Sarah strained her ears and heard it then, the distant thunder of hoofbeats approaching from the east, many riders moving fast. "Who?" she asked, though dread had already provided the answer. Red Sky's eyes met hers, dark and solemn. "My people, they come for me." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she helped Red Sky back inside the cabin. Fear clawed at her throat, not for herself, but for her children. Stories of Apache raids haunted every settler in the territory. Homesteads burned, men killed, women and children taken captive. What would they do when they found their wounded warrior in the home of a white woman? "My rifle," she said, moving toward where the weapon leaned against the wall. Red Sky's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "No. They will kill you before your finger touches the trigger." His eyes, intense and urgent, held hers. "Trust me, Sarah Mitchell. I will not let harm come to you or your children." "Why should I believe that?" she asked, though she made no further move toward the rifle. "Because I have given you my word," he answered simply, as if no greater assurance could exist. The riders were close now. Sarah could hear the snorting of horses, the jingle of bridles. She hurried to the bassinet, gathering her sleeping babies into her arms. If she was to die today, she would face death holding her children. Red Sky positioned himself in the doorway, still leaning on his crude crutch, but standing as straight as his wounds would allow. He called out in his native tongue, a series of fluid, rolling sounds that Sarah could not understand. The response came immediately. Sharp, questioning calls that seemed to carry both relief and anger. Then they appeared, materializing from the tree line like shadows given form. At least 50 Apache warriors on horseback, their faces painted for war, their weapons ready. They formed a semicircle around the front of the cabin, effectively cutting off any hope of escape. A tall warrior with grey streaks in his hair and an eagle feather tied at his temple urged his horse forward. He spoke rapidly to Red Sky, his tone commanding, his eyes flicking past him to where Sarah stood clutching her infants. Red Sky answered calmly, gesturing first to his wounds, then to Sarah, then to the freshly turned earth where she had buried the outlaws. The older warrior's expression remained hard as stone, his posture rigid with suspicion. More words were exchanged, voices rising. Sarah couldn't understand the language, but the tension was unmistakable. Several warriors dismounted, moving closer with hands on their weapons. One, a young man with hatred burning in his eyes, spat on the ground at Red Sky's feet, clearly challenging whatever he had said. Red Sky straightened, pain forgotten as his voice rang out with authority that needed no translation. The younger warrior stepped back, though his expression remained defiant. The older one, clearly a leader of some kind, raised his hand for silence. Then he spoke directly to Sarah, his English heavily accented but intelligible. "Woman, you tend wounds of Chief's son." Sarah's eyes widened at the revelation that Red Sky was the son of a chief. She nodded, finding her voice with effort. "Yes, he saved me and my children from bandits. I removed the bullets and cleaned his wounds." The chief studied her, his weathered face unreadable. "Why white woman help Apache? White people shoot Apache. Hang Apache. Put Apache on reservation to starve." Sarah swallowed hard, aware that her answer might determine whether she and her children lived or died. But lies would not serve her now. "Not all white people wish harm to the Apache," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Just as not all Apache wish harm to white settlers. Red Sky showed mercy to me and my babies. I showed mercy to him in return." A murmur ran through the gathered warriors. The chief's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Red Sky spoke again in their language, his words carrying the weight of a sworn oath. The young warrior who had spat earlier stepped forward, switching to broken English. "No trust white woman, brother Tall Pine dead because white men. They take land, kill buffalo, poison water." "She trick you!" Red Sky. Red Sky's response was swift and sharp, causing the younger warrior to fall silent, though rage still smoldered in his eyes. The chief dismounted, approaching the porch with measured steps. Red Sky moved aside with difficulty, allowing the older man to enter the cabin. Sarah held her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to retreat. The chief's eyes moved from Sarah to the triplets in her arms, then to the blood-stained floorboards that her scrubbing had failed to fully clean. He took in the fresh bandages on Red Sky's wounds, the medicine poultices Sarah had prepared from her small store of herbs. "You have no man?" he asked, gesturing around the cabin. "My husband died before my children were born," Sarah answered. "I'm alone here." Something shifted in the chief's expression, not softening exactly, but a recognition of her vulnerability, her isolation. "I am Chief Grey Wolf," he said finally. "Red Sky is my son. He say you fight like warrior to protect small ones." He pointed to the babies. "He say you have heart of Apache mother, though your skin is white." Sarah inclined her head, acknowledging the words without presuming they meant acceptance. Grey Wolf turned back to Red Sky, speaking again in their language. A rapid exchange followed, with Red Sky's voice growing stronger, more insistent. At one point, he gestured to the triplets, and Sarah's arms tightened around her children instinctively. Finally, Grey Wolf nodded, as if a decision had been reached. He faced Sarah again. "Red Sky, not yet heal. Wounds still speak death. He stay until moon is full again." He pointed to the sky, visible through the window, where the waning moon would be visible that night. "We camp near. Watch. Hunt for you." His eyes, black as obsidian, fixed on hers. "You save son of Grey Wolf. Now you under protection of Grey Wolf." Relief made Sarah's knees weak, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you, Chief Grey Wolf." The chief nodded once, then turned to leave. As he reached the door, he spoke without looking back. "If harm come to Red Sky while in your care, protection end. You understand?" "I understand," Sarah replied, the implied threat clear. Grey Wolf barked orders to his warriors. Most turned their horses, retreating back toward the tree line. A small group remained, establishing a camp just within the shelter of the forest edge, close enough to observe the cabin, but far enough to give the illusion of privacy. As the dust settled, Sarah's legs finally gave way. She sank into her rocking chair, the triplets still clutched to her chest. Red Sky lowered himself carefully to sit on the edge of the table. "You have nothing to fear from my father or our people," he said quietly. "They will not harm a woman who has shown kindness to the son of their chief." "And the young warrior, the angry one?" Sarah asked, remembering the hatred in those eyes. "Swift Arrow," Red Sky sighed. "He was brother to my wife, who died 2 winters ago of the white man's coughing sickness. His heart is filled with grief and anger." "Your wife." Sarah hadn't considered that this man might have had a family of his own. "And do you have children?" A shadow passed over Red Sky's face. "No, the spirits did not bless us with children before she walked the path to the afterlife." His gaze fell on the triplets, something like wonder softening his features. "3 at once is a powerful sign among my people. They will be considered blessed by the Great Spirit." Sarah looked down at her sleeping babies, marveling that what she had once seen as an impossible burden might be viewed as a divine blessing. How strange that it took an Apache warrior to help her see her children through new eyes. "What happens now?" she asked, uncertainty clouding her momentary relief. Red Sky met her gaze, his expression solemn yet somehow reassuring. "Now we heal, Sarah Mitchell, both of us, and then we see what path the Great Spirit has laid before us." Days melted into one another like spring snow on the mountains. The Apache camp remained at the edge of the clearing, a constant presence that Sarah gradually came to accept, if not entirely trust. Warriors came and went, some hunting game that they would silently leave on her porch, rabbits, a young deer, wild turkeys. Others watched the surrounding countryside, alert for any threat that might approach the homestead. Chief Grey Wolf visited each morning, checking on his son's progress with few words but watchful eyes. He never stayed long, but Sarah noticed how his gaze would linger on the triplets, particularly when they were awake and their blue eyes tracked movement around them. Red Sky's strength returned with surprising speed. By the end of the first week, he could walk without support, though the effort still brought a sheen of sweat to his brow. By the second week, He insisted on helping with small tasks around the cabin, whittling a new handle for Sarah's broom, mending a loose floorboard, carving 3 tiny amulets of smooth pine that he hung above the triplets, bassinet. "They will keep evil spirits away," he explained when Sarah questioned the symbols etched into the wood. "This one for strength," he pointed to the amulet hanging above James. "This for wisdom," he indicated the one over Thomas, named for his father. "And this," his finger hovered above little Mary's charm, "for healing hands." Sarah found herself watching Red Sky with increasing curiosity. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of discipline and self-awareness. Even injured, there was a fluid grace to him that reminded her of the mountain lions that sometimes prowled the higher slopes. When he spoke, which wasn't often, his words were chosen with care, each one carrying the weight of deliberate thought. One evening, as the triplets slept and Sarah kneaded dough for the next day's bread, Red Sky sat by the fire, sharpening a knife he had reclaimed from one of the buried outlaws. "May I ask you something?" Sarah ventured, dusting flour from her hands. He looked up, the firelight casting copper highlights across his face. "You may." "How did you learn to speak English so well?" A shadow flickered across his features. "When I was a boy, Christian missionaries came to our people. They built a school, said Apache children must learn white man's ways to survive in coming times." His knife paused in its rhythmic scraping against the whetstone. "My father sent me there for 3 summers, thought it wise to know the language of those who would take our land." Sarah absorbed this, recognizing the complexity behind his simple explanation. "Was it difficult? Being away from your people?" "Yes." His eyes met hers, and for a moment she glimpsed the boy he had been, torn between worlds, neither of which fully accepted him. "They beat children who spoke Apache, cut our hair, said our ways were devil worship." His jaw tightened. "But I learned, not just their words, but how they think. It has served me well." Sarah's hands stilled in the dough. "I'm sorry," she said softly, and meant it. Red Sky shrugged, resuming his work on the knife. "It was long ago. Now I use their language to protect my people." He glanced at her. "To speak with you." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the soft scrape of stone against steel. Sarah shaped the dough into loaves, aware of Red Sky's occasional gaze. Not intrusive, but attentive, as if he found her domestic tasks as fascinating as she found his warrior skills. Mary's thin cry broke the quiet. Sarah wiped her hands, but before she could move toward the bassinet, Red Sky had already risen. "I will bring her," he said, setting aside his knife. Sarah watched, amazed, as the Apache warrior who had killed 4 men without hesitation now gently lifted her daughter from her bed. His large hands cradled Mary with exquisite care, supporting her head as naturally as if he had held infants all his life. "She is hungry," he said, carrying the fussing baby to Sarah. "The others will wake soon too, always the same. When one cries, all cry." Sarah took Mary, settling into her rocking chair to nurse. "How did you know she was hungry and not just wet?" Red Sky's mouth curved slightly. "Different cries have different meanings." "This one," he mimicked Mary's particular wail, "says empty belly. Other one," he made a more stuttering sound, "says wet backside." A laugh escaped Sarah, the sound rusty from disuse. "You know more about babies than I would have expected from a warrior." Something warm flickered in his eyes. "I am eldest of 7, helped my mother with many siblings." He sat across from her, his gaze respectfully averted from her nursing. In my tribe, men learn to care for children too. A warrior who cannot nurture cannot truly protect." As predicted, James began to fuss next, followed almost immediately by Thomas. Red Sky retrieved them both, holding them with practiced ease until Sarah had finished with Mary and could take them. "It is easier with help," she acknowledged, shifting to accommodate the two hungry boys. "Before you came, I sometimes thought I would lose my mind trying to care for all three alone," Red Sky nodded. "Among my people, no woman raises children alone. Sisters, mothers, aunts, all women help with all children." His brow furrowed. "Why are you here with no family to aid you?" The question probed at wounds still raw, but Sarah found herself answering honestly. "Thomas and I came west because there was nothing left for us in Pennsylvania. His parents died in a fire that took their home. Mine disowned me when I married him. They thought him beneath me because he worked with his hands." She adjusted James, who had begun to doze at her breast. "We thought we could build something here, something that was just ours." Her voice caught. "When Thomas died, I considered returning east, but I couldn't bear the thought of crawling back to people who had turned their backs on us. And then the babies came, and travel became impossible." Red Sky listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he said simply, "Your spirit is strong, like the oak that bends in the storm but does not break." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. "Thank you." He rose, moving to the window to look out at the night. The moon hung nearly full in the sky, its light silvering the landscape. "2 more days," he said, almost to himself. "Then the moon is complete." Sarah's chest tightened with an emotion she didn't want to name. "And you will leave with your people." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the shadows. That was the agreement. "Yes," she agreed, though her heart whispered otherwise. That was the agreement. Later that night, after the triplets were settled and Red Sky had retreated to the small pallet he now used in the main room of the cabin, Sarah lay awake, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the valley. She thought of the days to come, returning to her solitary existence, caring for 3 growing infants alone, facing winter with dwindling supplies and no help. The prospect, which she had once accepted as her fate, now seemed unbearably bleak. In the main room, she heard Red Sky shift on his pallet. Was he also awake, thinking of his return to his people? Did he feel any regret at leaving this quiet cabin and the woman and children he had saved? Sarah closed her eyes, forcing away such thoughts. Red Sky was an Apache warrior, the son of a chief. His place was with his tribe, fighting for their survival in a world increasingly hostile to their existence. Her place was here, honoring Thomas's dream by making this homestead work. Their paths had crossed briefly, like stars passing in the night sky, but they were bound for different horizons. Yet as sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's dreams were filled with dark eyes and gentle hands, with a voice that spoke of nurturing warriors and women with spirits like oak trees. And in those dreams, the horizon they faced was the same. The day before, the full moon dawned clear and bright, with a crispness to the air that whispered of autumn's approach. Sarah woke early, her sleep having been fitful and brief. The thought of tomorrow's parting hung over her like a storm cloud, casting shadows on even the simplest tasks. She found Red Sky already awake, sitting cross-legged on the porch. His eyes were closed, his palms resting on his knees, his breathing deep and measured. Not wishing to disturb what appeared to be a form of prayer or meditation, Sarah moved quietly to the chicken coop to collect eggs for breakfast. When she returned, Red Sky had risen and was gazing toward the eastern hills, where the rising sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber. He turned at her approach, and something in his expression made her heart stutter, a softness, a vulnerability she had not seen before. "The sun rises differently here," he said, his voice low. "On reservation land, it brings only another day of hunger and waiting." "Here, it promises," he trailed off, seeming to search for the right word. "Possibility," Sarah offered. He nodded slowly. "Yes, possibility." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings. Then the triplets announced their awakening with hungry cries, and the spell broke. Sarah hurried inside, grateful for the distraction of her children's needs. The morning passed in a dance of domestic tasks. Red Sky chopped wood for the stove, his movements fluid and strong, showing little evidence of his recent injuries. Sarah prepared a stew with rabbit meat brought by the Apache hunters, watching from the window as Red Sky worked. How easily he had become part of her daily rhythm, filling spaces she hadn't known were empty. Around midday, as Sarah was hanging laundry while the babies napped, a rider appeared on the road from Willow Creek. She shaded her eyes against the sun, recognizing the sturdy bay horse and the broad-shouldered silhouette of Sheriff Daniel Fletcher. Red Sky materialized at her side, his posture alert. "Friend?" he asked quietly. "The sheriff," Sarah replied, her stomach knotting with sudden anxiety. "He checks on me occasionally since Thomas died." Red Sky's jaw tightened. "He will not be pleased to find Apache here." "No," Sarah agreed. But Sheriff Fletcher is a fair man. He fought against vigilantes who wanted to burn out peaceful native families last year." Even so, Red Sky melted back toward the cabin, where he could observe without being immediately visible. The Apache camp was similarly alert, warriors moving into positions of readiness without appearing overtly threatening. Sheriff Fletcher slowed his horse as he approached, his weathered face registering surprise at the sight of the Apache encampment. His hand moved to rest on his holstered revolver, not drawing it, but making clear he was prepared for trouble. "Morning, Mrs. Mitchell," he called, tipping his hat as he reined in his horse. His eyes scanned the property, taking in the fresh-cut wood, the mended fence, the native presence at the tree line. "Everything all right here?" Sarah forced a smile. "Good morning, Sheriff. Yes, everything is fine." Fletcher's bushy eyebrows drew together. "Wasn't expecting to find you with company of this sort?" He nodded toward the Apache camp. "Mind telling me what's going on?" Before Sarah could answer, Red Sky stepped out from the shadow of the cabin, walking with deliberate calm to stand beside her. The sheriff's hand tightened on his revolver, but he didn't draw. "This is Red Sky," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He saved my life and the children's lives when outlaws attacked the homestead 2 weeks ago." Fletcher's eyes narrowed. "Outlaws? What outlaws?" "4 men, led by someone called Blackwood." Sarah gestured toward the grove where she had buried the bodies. "They're buried over there." "They would have killed us all if Red Sky hadn't intervened." The sheriff's expression shifted to one of grim satisfaction. "Blackwood, you say? We've had a federal marshal searching for him and his gang for months, wanted for murder, robbery, and worse across 3 territories." His gaze returned to Red Sky, reassessing. "You took down Blackwood and his men." Red Sky inclined his head slightly. "They had killed my brother. I followed their trail. Found them here, hurting the woman and threatening her young ones." Sheriff Fletcher relaxed his grip on his weapon, though wariness still lined his face. "That's quite a story." He looked to Sarah for confirmation. "It's the truth," she said firmly. "Red Sky was badly wounded in the fight. I've been caring for him while he heals. His father, Chief Grey Wolf, and some of their people have been camped nearby." She hesitated, then added, "They've been helping me, bringing game, watching for danger. Fletcher absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. Chief Grey Wolf, you say? His band is supposed to be on the reservation at San Carlos. My people do not thrive in cages, Red Sky said, his voice level but with steel beneath. We hunt, we follow the seasons. Then we return. The sheriff dismounted slowly, tying his horse to the porch rail. Mrs. Mitchell, might I have a private word? Sarah glanced at Red Sky, who nodded almost imperceptibly before walking a short distance away, giving them space but remaining within sight. What's really going on here, Sarah? Fletcher asked in a low voice once Red Sky was out of earshot. Are you being held against your will? Blink twice if you can't speak freely. Sarah shook her head emphatically. No, Daniel, everything I told you is true. Red Sky saved us, and I saved him in return. His people have been nothing but helpful. She sighed, aware of how the situation must appear to outside eyes. I know how unusual this must seem, but unusual, Fletcher interrupted with a humorless laugh. And Sarah, if word gets out that you're harboring Apaches, there are men who would ride out here and burn this place to the ground, children or no children. Is that a threat, Sheriff? Sarah's voice hardened. No, it's a warning from a friend, Fletcher replied, his expression softening. Your husband was a good man. I promised him I'd keep an eye on you, and that's what I'm trying to do. From inside the cabin came the sound of one of the triplets crying. Sarah glanced toward the door. Torn. Go on, Fletcher said. I'll wait. Sarah hurried inside to find Mary awake and fussing. She changed the baby quickly, soothing her with soft words before returning to the porch, where Fletcher stood looking out at the Apache camp with a troubled expression. The full moon is tomorrow, Sarah said, adjusting Mary in her arms. Red Sky will be well enough to return with his people then. They've given their word. Fletcher turned to her, his face grave. It may not be that simple anymore. I wasn't just passing by, Sarah. I came to warn you. He lowered his voice. There's a new cavalry lieutenant at Fort Grant, man named Hollister. He's been ordered to round up any Apache found off the reservation, by force if necessary. Sarah's blood ran cold. When? Soon. Could be days. Could be tomorrow. Fletcher glanced toward Red Sky, who stood watching them from a distance. I've heard stories about this Lieutenant Hollister. He was at Sand Creek. The name sent a chill down Sarah's spine. The Sand Creek massacre had shocked even those hardened to the brutalities of frontier conflict. Hundreds of peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho, mostly women and children, slaughtered by cavalry under a commander who ordered his men to kill and scalp all, big and little. You need to get them out of here, Fletcher continued. Today, if possible. Hollister has scouts tracking any Apache movement in the territory. Sarah clutched Mary tighter. I understand. Thank you for the warning. Fletcher placed a hand on her shoulder. Thomas would want you to be safe, Sarah. Once they're gone, you should consider coming into town for a while. Stay with the widow Peterson until things settle down. This is my home, Sarah replied firmly. I won't abandon it. The sheriff sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing. Stubborn as always. He mounted his horse, settling into the saddle with the ease of a man who spent more time on horseback than off. I'll do what I can to steer Hollister away from this area, but I can't promise anything. Be careful, Sarah. As Fletcher rode away, Red Sky approached, his expression questioning. Sarah quickly relayed what the sheriff had told her, watching alarm flash across Red Sky's normally composed features. We must tell my father, he said, already moving toward the Apache camp. Prepare the children. We may need to leave quickly. Leave, Sarah echoed, confused. You mean you and your people? Red Sky turned back, his dark eyes intense. All of us, Sarah. You and the children cannot stay here alone now. If this Hollister believes you have helped Apache renegades, he will show no mercy, even to a mother with infants. The truth of his words struck her like a physical blow. The protection she had felt these past weeks had been an illusion. The real world, with its hatreds, its violence, its unyielding lines between white and native, had found them at last. As Red Sky strode toward the camp to speak with Chief Grey Wolf, Sarah stood frozen on her porch, Mary wriggling in her arms, the sun warm on her face. Beyond the peaceful clearing, beyond the protective circle of Apache warriors, a storm was gathering. By nightfall, everything would change once more. The Apache camp transformed into a flurry of activity. Tents were dismantled, horses readied, supplies gathered with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched from the cabin doorway as Chief Grey Wolf convened with his warriors, their expressions grave as Red Sky explained the danger approaching. Occasionally, their eyes would turn toward her cabin, their gazes weighted with consideration. Inside, Sarah moved with deliberate calm, though her hands trembled as she gathered essential supplies. Diapers, clothing for the triplets, dried meat, her small store of cornmeal and flour. What did one pack when fleeing with 3 infants? What could she carry? What must she leave behind? Her gaze fell on Thomas's wooden chest, tucked beneath their bed. Inside lay his Bible, their marriage certificate, the deed to their homestead, and the silver locket containing a curl of his hair, the sum of a life cut short, reduced to a box of paper and trinkets. She couldn't leave it behind. Red Sky entered without knocking, his movements charged with urgency. My father agrees we must leave before sunset. Scouts report dust on the eastern horizon, many horses moving fast. Hollister, Sarah breathed, her worst fears confirmed. Red Sky nodded grimly. We will head west, toward the mountains. There are caves there, places cavalry cannot easily follow. He surveyed her scattered preparations. Take only what is necessary for survival. The children's needs first. This comes too, Sarah said firmly, placing a hand on Thomas's chest. It's all I have left of my husband. Something flickered in Red Sky's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or a shadow of regret. He nodded. I will carry it. Outside, Swift Arrow approached the cabin, his steps reluctant but determined. He spoke rapidly to Red Sky and Apache, gesturing toward Sarah and then to the approaching dust cloud visible now on the distant plain. Red Sky replied sharply, his stance protective as he positioned himself between Swift Arrow and the doorway where Sarah stood. What does he want? Sarah asked quietly. Red Sky's jaw tightened. He says you will slow us down, that we should leave you. Sarah's heart clenched, but she raised her chin. He's right. 3 babies and a woman will make your escape more difficult. She met Swift Arrow's hostile gaze directly, but Red Sky gave his word to protect us, and I believe he will honor it. Red Sky translated her words. Swift Arrow's expression darkened, but something like grudging respect flickered across his features before he turned away, returning to the camp with rigid shoulders. My father has decided, Red Sky said after the young warrior had gone. You and the children come with us. The tribe will protect you. His voice softened. I will protect you. The words hung between them, laden with meaning beyond mere physical safety. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks, and she turned away under the pretense of checking on the triplets. How will we travel? She asked, focusing on practicalities. And I can't ride and hold all 3 babies. My father has thought of this. Red Sky led her outside to where a travois had been constructed, a wooden frame with a basket-like structure secured to it, lined with soft furs and blankets. "The little ones will ride here, pulled by my horse. You will ride with Grey Dove." He indicated an older woman who was preparing a gentle-looking mare. "She is a mother of 7 children, like my own mother. She will help with the babies." Sarah approached the travois, examining the craftsmanship with amazement. "You built this so quickly. Our people have always been ready to move at a moment's notice," Red Sky explained. "It is how we have survived." As the sun began its westward descent, Sarah took a final look at the cabin that had been her home. The garden Thomas had planted, now flourishing with late summer vegetables. The grave on the hill where he rested beneath the juniper tree. She would likely never see this place again. "I should say goodbye," she murmured, her voice catching, "to Thomas." Red Sky's expression softened with understanding. "Go. We will wait." Sarah climbed the hill alone, the warm breeze catching at her skirts as she approached the simple wooden cross marking her husband's grave. She knelt beside it, touching the sun-warmed wood with gentle fingers. "I don't know if you can hear me, Thomas," she whispered, "but I'm taking our children away from here. I'm doing what I must to keep them safe." Tears burned behind her eyes. "These people, these Apaches, they've shown me kindness I never expected. Their chief's son saved our lives." She paused, struggling with words that felt like betrayal, yet weren't. I think you would understand. You always said a person should be judged by their actions, not by the color of their skin or the language on their tongue." The wind stirred the branches of the juniper, sending a shower of blueberries onto the grave. Sarah took it as a sign, a blessing perhaps. "I'll tell our children about you," she promised, "about your dreams for this place, your kindness, your strength. They'll know their father, even though they'll never meet him." She placed a kiss upon her fingers, then pressed them to the cross. "Goodbye, my love." When she returned to the clearing, the Apache were mounted and ready. Red Sky stood holding the reins of his horse, his expression solemn as he watched her approach. The triplets had already been secured in the travois, nested among the furs like bird chicks in a downy nest. They slept peacefully, unaware of the danger or the journey ahead. Grey Dove, a woman of perhaps 50 with silver streaks in her long braids, waited beside a dun-colored mare. She spoke no English, but her weathered face held kindness as she helped Sarah mount, showing her how to sit securely behind her on the horse's back. Chief Grey Wolf raised his hand, and the band moved out in near silence, melting into the tree line with practiced stealth. Sarah looked back once at the cabin, silhouetted against the setting sun, etching the image into her memory. They traveled through the twilight and into the darkness, moving steadily westward toward the distant mountains. The Apache rode with confidence, even in the growing dark, following trails visible only to their experienced eyes. Red Sky stayed close to the travois, checking frequently on the sleeping triplets. Occasionally, he would glance back at Sarah, as if to reassure himself of her presence. Little Mary woke hungry as the moon rose, her cries piercing the night. The band halted in a sheltered draw, where the sounds would not carry far. Grey Dove helped Sarah dismount, her gnarled hands surprisingly gentle. The older woman shooed away the male warriors with sharp words, creating a circle of privacy where Sarah could nurse her daughter. Red Sky approached only after Mary had finished, carrying Thomas and James, who had woken as well. He handed them to Sarah with practiced ease, then retreated to allow her to feed them in peace. Grey Dove remained, however, humming a soft melody as she showed Sarah how to use a carrier made of soft deerskin to hold a baby securely against her chest while riding. She says this is how Apache mothers travel with young ones, Red Sky translated, returning when Sarah had finished nursing. It keeps the baby warm and the mother's hands free. Sarah examined the ingenious carrier. Please thank her for me. Tell her I'm grateful for her help. Red Sky spoke to Grey Dove, who smiled and patted Sarah's hand before moving away to tend to her own horse. Your people have been kinder than I had any right to expect, Sarah said quietly as she settled the now sleeping triplets back into the travois. Red Sky's expression was difficult to read in the moonlight. You saved my life. You treated me with respect when many white women would have feared me or hated me. He adjusted a blanket over little Thomas. My father says you have an Apache spirit in a white body. The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. And what do you say? His eyes met hers, dark and intent. I say that the Great Spirit works in ways we cannot understand, that perhaps our paths crossed for a purpose greater than either of us can see. A shout from the front of the column broke the moment. Red Sky tensed, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Swift Arrow appeared from the darkness, speaking rapidly in Apache, pointing back toward the east. Under torches, Red Sky translated grimly, moving fast on our trail. The cavalry has found our tracks. Fear clutched at Sarah's heart. How? We've been so careful. Hollister must have Apache scouts who betrayed their own people. Bitterness edged his voice. It happens. Some believe serving the white man will save them from the white man's cruelty. Chief Grey Wolf approached, conferring quickly with Red Sky. Sarah couldn't understand their words, but their grave expressions needed no translation. We must split up, Red Sky explained after his father moved away. A smaller group will travel faster with you and the children. The main band will lead the soldiers on a false trail south. That's too dangerous, Sarah protested. If they're caught, my father has evaded cavalry for many seasons, Red Sky assured her. This is our way. The many protect the few when the few are most vulnerable. His hand briefly touched her arm. You and the little ones are most vulnerable. Swift Arrow appeared again, leading Red Sky's horse with the travois attached. His expression was no longer hostile but resolute. He spoke directly to Sarah, the words incomprehensible but the tone unmistakable, a pledge, a promise. Adnato, he says he will ride with the group protecting you, Red Sky translated, surprise evident in his voice, that his bow and knife are pledged to keep his chief's grandchildren safe. Grandchildren, Sarah repeated, confusion furrowing her brow. Red Sky's expression softened. Among our people, when a warrior saves a life, that life becomes his responsibility, part of his family. By saving you and your children, I made you part of my family in the eyes of the tribe. The children of my family are the grandchildren of my father. The simple explanation struck Sarah with unexpected force. In a few weeks, these people had claimed her children as their own more completely than her own parents ever had. They were willing to risk their lives to protect strangers because one of their own had given his word. Thank you, she said to Swift Arrow, meeting his gaze directly, for protecting my children. The young warrior nodded once, solemn and dignified, before moving away to prepare for the journey ahead. Red Sky watched him go, something like pride in his expression. He begins to understand what I saw in you from the first day. He turned back to Sarah, his face grave once more. We must move quickly now. The mountains are still far, and dawn will reveal our tracks more clearly. As Sarah mounted behind Grey Dove once more, she felt the weight of lives depending on her strength. Not just her children's, but now these people who had become unlikely allies and protectors. The distant torches flickered on the eastern horizon like malevolent stars, drawing closer with each passing moment. The small group, Sarah, the triplets, Red Sky, Swift Arrow, Grey Dove, and 2 other warriors, broke away from the main band, turning northwest toward the deepest part of the mountains. As they rode into the darkness, Sarah offered a silent prayer for those riding south as decoys, and for the small, vulnerable party placing their faith in shadows and speed. Night cloaked their desperate flight through unforgiving terrain. The small band followed deer trails and dry creek beds, choosing paths that offered both concealment and solid ground that wouldn't hold tracks. Grey Dove rode with unwavering steadiness, never complaining despite the additional burden of Sarah behind her. Swift Arrow scouted ahead, returning periodically to confer with Red Sky in hushed tones. The 2 other warriors, brothers named Running Fox and Stone Hand, guarded the rear, alert for any sign of pursuit. The mountains loomed ever larger against the star-filled sky, their jagged silhouettes promising both sanctuary and peril. Sarah's body ached from the unaccustomed hours on horseback, but she dared not request a rest. Every minute gained was another chance for Chief Grey Wolf's diversion to succeed, another mile between her children and Lieutenant Hollister's troops. Shortly before midnight, little James began to whimper in the travois. His cries quickly grew more insistent, rising in pitch until they threatened to pierce the night. Red Sky halted the group with a raised hand, directing them into a small ravine sheltered by juniper trees. Stonehand immediately disappeared into the darkness to stand watch, while Running Fox gathered dry branches for a fire so small it barely illuminated their faces. Sarah hurried to the travois, lifting James into her arms. His skin burned against her touch, his little face flushed with fever. Panic rose in her throat. "He's burning up," she whispered as Red Sky knelt beside her. "He was fine earlier, I don't understand." Grey Dove approached, her lined face concerned as she reached for the infant. She felt his forehead, checked his throat, then spoke rapidly to Red Sky. "She says it is the night fever," he translated. "It comes quickly to little ones, especially during travel. She has medicine that will help." The older woman rummaged in a small pouch at her waist, producing a bundle of dried leaves. She gestured for water, which Swift Arrow provided from his canteen. Using a small stone mortar she carried, Grey Dove ground the leaves into a paste, adding a few drops of water to create a thick liquid. She gestured for Sarah to open James's mouth and carefully placed a tiny amount on his tongue. "What is it?" Sarah asked, anxiety evident in her voice. "Willow bark and another herb my people use," Red Sky explained. "It will reduce the fever and help him sleep." Sarah watched anxiously as Grey Dove continued administering small amounts of the medicine. After what seemed an eternity, James's crying subsided to whimpers, then to the occasional hiccup. His body gradually relaxed in her arms, though his skin remained worryingly warm. "We must wait," Red Sky said, settling beside her. "Let the medicine work before we continue." Swift Arrow muttered something, glancing eastward with obvious concern. "He fears the soldiers will gain ground while we delay," Red Sky explained, though he made no move to rush their departure. "I can't risk James's life by traveling before he's better," Sarah said firmly, meeting Swift Arrow's impatient gaze. "I won't sacrifice one child to save the others." When Red Sky translated her words, something shifted in Swift Arrow's expression. A reluctant respect, perhaps. He nodded once, then moved to confer with Running Fox at the edge of their small camp. Grey Dove sat close beside Sarah, occasionally checking James's temperature with gentle fingers. She spoke softly in Apache. the words unintelligible but their tone soothing. "Well, she says you are a good mother," Red Sky translated, "that you have the heart of a she-wolf protecting her cubs." Sarah managed a weary smile. "Tell her I'm grateful for her help. I wouldn't know what to do for James without her." As Red Sky relayed her words, Sarah was struck by how much her life had changed in such a short time. Just weeks ago, she had been utterly alone, struggling to care for her newborns while grieving her husband. Now she sat among people she once would have feared, receiving their protection and wisdom, fleeing with them from those who should have been her allies. "Your thoughts are heavy," Red Sky observed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Sarah sighed, adjusting James in her arms. "I was thinking how strange life's path can be, how quickly everything can change." His eyes reflected the tiny fire's glow. "My people say that a life without unexpected turns is a life half-lived." His gaze dropped to James, whose breathing had grown more regular. "The fever lessens, the medicine works." Relief flooded through Sarah as she felt her son's forehead, finding it cooler than before. "Yes, thank goodness." Swift Arrow approached, speaking urgently to Red Sky. Sarah didn't need a translation to understand his message. They needed to move on. "And the little one can travel?" Red Sky asked her, though his eyes said he would support her decision either way. Sarah nodded. "If we go slowly at first." They extinguished the fire and prepared to depart. Before mounting, Grey Dove showed Sarah how to secure James against her chest in the deerskin carrier, leaving her arms free. The arrangement allowed Sarah to monitor his temperature throughout the journey while keeping him warm against the night chill. They rode through the darkest hours, the landscape growing increasingly rugged as they approached the foothills. False dawn had just begun to lighten the eastern sky when Stone Hand, who had been scouting ahead, returned at a gallop. His urgent words needed no translation, danger approaching. Red Sky quickly directed them into a dense thicket of pine and juniper that covered a steep slope. They dismounted, leading the horses deeper into the concealing vegetation. Sarah's heart pounded as she heard what had alarmed Stone Hand, the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats and men's voices carrying through the still morning air. "Cavalry patrol," Red Sky whispered, positioning himself protectively near Sarah and the triplets. They must have split their forces when they discovered the diversion. Swift Arrow crept forward to the edge of the thicket, his movements silent as a shadow. He returned moments later, his expression grim. 6 soldiers, Red Sky translated after Swift Arrow had reported, moving slowly, searching. "They suspect we came this way." Sarah clutched the carrier, holding James to her chest, while Grey Dove held Thomas and Mary close, covering their mouths gently to prevent any sounds. The horses, thankfully, stood motionless, as if sensing the need for absolute silence. The minutes stretched agonizingly as the patrol drew closer. Through gaps in the foliage, Sarah could see blue uniforms, the gleam of rifle barrels in the growing light. One soldier rode so near that she could make out the lines of fatigue on his young face, the dust coating his uniform. He paused, scanning the thicket where they hid, his gaze passing over their location without recognition. Then, disaster. Little Mary, perhaps sensing the tension, began to fuss. Her whimpers were soft, but in the stillness of dawn, they might as well have been shouts. Grey Dove pressed the baby closer, humming almost imperceptibly, but Mary's distress only grew. The nearest soldier reined his horse, head tilting as he listened. "You hear that, Corporal?" he called to his companion. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She met Red Sky's eyes, seeing in them a terrible resolve. His hand moved to his knife, and she knew with sickening certainty that he would attack rather than allow them to be discovered. A suicidal gesture that would buy her mere moments to flee with the children. Just then, a coyote's howl rose from somewhere to the south, long, mournful, and eerily similar to an infant's cry. Another answered from a different direction. The soldier relaxed, chuckling. Just coyotes, Jenkins. This place has got you jumping at shadows. Jenkins shook his head, unconvinced but unwilling to argue. If you say so, Corporal. The patrol moved on, following the trail northward. Only when the sounds of their passage had faded completely did Sarah release the breath she'd been holding. Swift Arrow emerged from the brush nearby, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. He mimicked the coyote, Red Sky explained, admiration evident in his voice. An old Apache trick. Swift Arrow approached Sarah, reaching out to touch Mary's head with unexpected gentleness. He spoke briefly, his voice solemn. He says the little one has a warrior's spirit, Red Sky translated. Fearless, even among enemies. Sarah managed a shaky smile. Thank him for me. Tell him his quick thinking saved us all. As Swift Arrow received the translation, his usual hardness softened, and he inclined his head to Sarah with newfound respect. They dared not linger. The patrol's presence meant others could be nearby. They continued their journey as the sun rose, the mountains now close enough that Sarah could make out individual trees clinging to the rocky slopes. Red Sky led them to a narrow canyon, its entrance almost invisible behind a tumble of boulders. The passage twisted upward, barely wide enough for the horses to navigate single file. My people have used this path for generations, Red Sky explained as they climbed. Few white men know of its existence. The canyon eventually opened into a hidden valley, sheltered on all sides by steep cliffs. A clear stream ran through its center, and grassy meadows offered grazing for the horses. Most importantly, it contained several caves set high in the cliff walls, accessible only by narrow, defensible paths. We will be safe here, Red Sky said, as they dismounted near the largest cave, at least for a time. The cave itself proved surprisingly hospitable, dry, with a high ceiling, and enough space for their small group to shelter comfortably. Previous occupants had left a stone-ringed fire pit and crude sleeping platforms covered with dried grasses. Grey Dove immediately set about making a nest for the triplets, while Running Fox and Stone Hand secured the horses in a sheltered grove near the stream. Sarah stood at the cave entrance, gazing out at the hidden valley that had become their sanctuary. From this vantage point, she could see for miles across the plains they had traversed during the night. No dust clouds rose on the horizon, no glint of metal betrayed pursuing cavalry. For the moment, at least, they had evaded capture. Red Sky joined her, his shoulder nearly touching hers as they stood in companionable silence. The morning sun warmed their faces, a simple pleasure made profound by the dangers they had survived. What happens now? Sarah asked finally, voicing the question that had been circling in her mind since they fled the homestead. Red Sky turned to face her, his expression solemn yet gentle. Now we wait for my father and the others. If all has gone as planned, they will join us here in 2 days' time. And then, she pressed, needing to understand what future awaited her and her children. A shadow crossed his features. That is less certain. Winter comes soon. The tribe must find a place to shelter until spring, somewhere the soldiers cannot reach us. Us, Sarah repeated, the word hanging between them like a question. Red Sky's gaze intensified, and he took her hand in his. The first time he'd initiated such contact, his palm was calloused but warm against her skin. Sarah Mitchell, he said, her name spoken with a reverence that made her breath catch. And my life belongs to you for saving it. Your lives belong to me for saving them. In the eyes of my people, we are already bound, but I would hear it from your lips. Will you and your children remain with us, with me?" The question struck deeper than she had anticipated, piercing through layers of grief and fear to touch something she had believed died with Thomas. Hope, possibility, perhaps even love. Before she could answer, Swift Arrow appeared at the edge of the clearing, gesturing urgently toward the canyon entrance. Red Sky's expression shifted instantly from vulnerability to alertness. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her heart sinking. "Riders approaching," Red Sky replied grimly. "Many riders." He squeezed her hand once before releasing it, already moving toward where the warriors gathered, discussing strategy in rapid Apache. Sarah watched him go, his questions still reverberating in her mind, her answer unspoken but growing clearer with each beat of her heart. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than any of them had expected. Within the hour, they would face either reunion with Chief Grey Wolf's band or a final confrontation with Lieutenant Hollister's cavalry. As Sarah hurried back to her children, she offered a silent prayer that she would live long enough to give Red Sky the answer he sought, the answer that now seemed as inevitable as the sunrise. Sarah clutched her children close within the sheltering darkness of the cave, their small bodies warm against her trembling hands. Grey Dove had positioned herself protectively beside them, a bone-handled knife gleaming in her weathered palm. Outside, Red Sky, Swift Arrow, and the others prepared for whatever approached through the narrow canyon. "Is it the soldiers?" Sarah whispered to Grey Dove, though she knew the older woman couldn't understand her words. Something in her tone must have conveyed her meaning, however, for Grey Dove shook her head, pointing to her ear and then making a circular motion with her finger. "Not sure. Listen." The minutes stretched like years as Sarah strained to hear beyond the pounding of her own heart. Then, faintly at first but growing stronger, came a sound that made her breath catch, a rhythmic chanting, rising and falling in a pattern she had heard once before, when Chief Grey Wolf's band had first discovered her cabin. Apache voices, Apache song. Red Sky appeared at the cave entrance, his face transformed by joy and relief. "My father comes," he announced. "With many warriors, they have eluded the Bluecoats." Sarah's knees weakened with sudden relief. She gathered the triplets into her arms and followed Red Sky down to the valley floor, where Chief Grey Wolf and his band were entering through the canyon passage. They numbered fewer than before, some 30 warriors instead of 50, but their spirits seemed high, many raising their weapons in triumph as they entered the hidden sanctuary. Chief Grey Wolf dismounted with the fluid grace of a much younger man. His eyes sought out Red Sky first, cataloguing his son's condition with a father's practiced concern before turning to Sarah and the infants. "You are well?" he asked in his accented English. "Yes, thanks to your son and his companions," Sarah replied, inclining her head respectfully. "They protected us with great courage." The chief's weathered face softened almost imperceptibly. "My son chooses well those he defends." His gaze lingered on the triplets, who stared back with wide, curious eyes. The little ones grow strong already. Good Apache blood flows into them. Sarah glanced at Red Sky, confused by the chief's words. Red Sky cleared his throat, appearing almost embarrassed, an expression she had never before seen on his face. "In our way," he explained, "when a warrior saves a life, his spirit flows into those he has saved. They become family, blood of his blood. The children of my son are my grandchildren," Chief Grey Wolf stated with finality, reaching out to touch James's cheek with surprising gentleness. "Even those born to others, The simple acceptance in his words brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Her own parents had disowned her for marrying beneath her station. Here was a man from an entirely different world, claiming her children as his own through a bond of honor and sacrifice. As the band established their camp in the valley, Swift Arrow approached, his customary scowl replaced by an expression of grudging respect. He spoke directly to Sarah, his English halting but comprehensible. "Woman brave, children strong." He touched his chest. "Swift Arrow protect." The declaration stunned Sarah into momentary silence. This was the man who had once advocated abandoning her to the outlaws, who had resented her presence among his people. Now he offered his protection with the solemnity of a sacred oath. "Thank you," she replied with equal gravity. "My children and I are fortunate to have such a guardian." Swift Arrow nodded once, then moved away to help with the camp preparations. Red Sky watched him go, satisfaction evident in his eyes. "He has traveled a long path in a short time," he observed, "from hatred to understanding." "As have I," Sarah admitted softly. "I once feared your people as much as he resented mine." Red Sky's gaze grew tender. "A draw, and now I see that courage and compassion know no boundaries of skin or language." She looked up at him, allowing her heart to speak through her eyes. "Now I see you, Red Sky, not as Apache or warrior or chief's son, but as the man who saved my children, who has shown me kindness when I most needed it." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. And what else do you see, Sarah Mitchell?" Her voice caught in her throat, but she forced the words out, knowing they could change everything. "I see a future I never thought possible." Something fierce and joyful kindled in his eyes, but before he could respond, a commotion arose from the canyon entrance. A scout raced into the valley, his horse lathered with exertion. He called out to Chief Greywolf, his words rapid and urgent. "Soldiers!" Red Sky translated grimly as the band gathered around the scout. "A full company approaching from the east. Lieutenant Hollister leads them." Sarah's momentary happiness shattered into fear. "How did they find us?" "They followed our false trail to its end, then began searching all known Apache hiding places." Red Sky explained, as his father conferred with the warriors. "This valley has sheltered our people before. Hollister must have guides who know of it." Chief Greywolf approached, his expression resolute. "We prepare for battle," he told Sarah. "Take children deep into cave. Grey Dove will guard." "No," Sarah said firmly, surprising herself as much as the chief. "No more running, no more hiding." Red Sky stared at her. "Sarah, these men will show no mercy. What Blackwood would have done to you is nothing compared to what Hollister's soldiers might do." "I know," she replied, steeling herself against the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "But I also know that if we keep running, they will never stop hunting us. My children deserve better than a life of constant flight." She handed the triplets to Grey Dove, then straightened her skirts and smoothed her hair. "I will speak to them. They will not listen to an Apache woman," Chief Greywolf said, misunderstanding her intent. "But they might listen to a white widow with 3 infants," Sarah corrected gently. "To the daughter of Judge William Harrington of Philadelphia." Red Sky's eyes widened at this revelation. "Your father is a judge." "Was," Sarah replied. "He disowned me when I married Thomas, a carpenter's son." "But Lieutenant Hollister won't know that." She squared her shoulders. "Let me try, Chief Greywolf. Let me use the privilege of my white skin to protect those I have come to love." The chief studied her for a long moment, then inclined his head. "You have the heart of a warrior. We will give you your chance, but we will also prepare for battle." He turned to his men, issuing orders in rapid Apache. Red Sky caught Sarah's arm as she prepared to leave. "This is too dangerous. Hollister's reputation." "I know what kind of man he is," Sarah interrupted, touching Red Sky's cheek with trembling fingers. "That's why I must try. For our children's sake." The word "our" hung between them, freighted with meaning. Red Sky covered her hand with his own, pressing it against his face. "I will be watching," he promised. "And if they threaten you, I will come, no matter the cost." Sarah nodded, knowing nothing she said would dissuade him. "The answer is yes," she whispered. "To what you asked earlier. Yes, we will stay with you, with your people." Joy and fear warred in his expression. He bent suddenly, pressing his forehead against hers in a gesture of profound intimacy. "Return to me, Sarah Mitchell." "I will," she vowed. As cavalry hoofbeats echoed through the canyon, Sarah walked alone to meet them, her heart thundering but her step steady. She positioned herself at the entrance to the valley, a solitary figure in a faded calico dress, her golden hair loose around her shoulders, her hands empty and open at her sides. Lieutenant Hollister led the column, a tall man with cold eyes and a face hardened by years of frontier warfare. He reined in sharply at the sight of her, suspicion evident in his posture. "Ma'am," he said warily, "this is no place for a white woman. Are you being held captive?" Sarah lifted her chin. "No, Lieutenant, I am here of my own free will, with my children." Hollister's eyes narrowed. "Your children?" "Triplets, sir, newborns. Their father, my husband, died this spring." She met his gaze without flinching. "I am Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Judge William Harrington of Philadelphia." The name had its intended effect. Hollister straightened in his saddle, reassessing her with new interest. "Judge Harrington's daughter. What in God's name are you doing with a band of renegade Apache? These people saved my life and my children's lives when outlaws attacked our homestead." Sarah replied, each word measured and clear. "Their chief's son was wounded protecting us. I nursed him back to health, and when we learned you were pursuing them, they took us with them rather than leave us to face possible retribution." Hollister's expression darkened. "Ma'am, those savages have killed dozens of settlers. They belong on the reservation where they can be controlled. With all due respect, Lieutenant, I've seen the reservations," Sarah countered, drawing on half-remembered conversations with Thomas. "The land is barren, the supplies promised by the government rarely arrive in full, and disease spreads unchecked through the camps." "That's not my concern," Hollister snapped. "My orders are to return all Apache to San Carlos, by force, if necessary." Sarah straightened to her full height. "If you attack these people, you will have to go through me first. And then you will have to explain to your superiors why you ordered the death of a judge's daughter and her 3 infant children." A muscle twitched in Hollister's jaw. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Sarah countered. "My father sits on the bench in Philadelphia. He corresponds regularly with senators and congressmen. How would it look in the Eastern newspapers, Lieutenant? Army officer massacres, prestigious judge's daughter, and grandchildren." Uncertainty flickered in Hollister's eyes. The threat of political consequences, of scandal in the East, was one that no career military man could ignore entirely. "What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked finally. Sarah sensed the first crack in his resolve and pressed forward. "Allow Chief Grey Wolf and his band safe passage north to the unceded territories. In return, they will agree not to raid settlements or army posts. I will remain with them as an observer to ensure they keep their word." "You want to stay with them?" Hollister asked incredulously. "A white woman alone among savages." "They are not savages," Sarah replied firmly. They are people trying to survive in a world that has taken everything from them, just as I am. Hollister dismounted, approaching until he stood just feet away. He lowered his voice so his men couldn't hear. "Mrs. Mitchell, I don't know what kind of situation you've gotten yourself into, but if you're being coerced—" "I am not," Sarah interrupted. "I am making a choice for myself and my children. A choice to live among people who have shown us nothing but kindness and protection." The lieutenant studied her face, searching for signs of deception or fear. Finding none, he sighed heavily. "I can't simply let them go. My orders." "Then report that they escaped," Sarah suggested. "That you tracked them to the mountains but lost their trail. It happens, doesn't it? Even to the best cavalry units." Hollister's lips thinned. "And if I refuse? If I decide to carry out my orders, regardless of your threats, then there will be bloodshed on both sides," Sarah answered truthfully. "And I promise you, Lieutenant, my father will ensure your name is remembered, not as a hero, but as the man who orphaned Judge Harrington's grandchildren." For several tense moments, Hollister said nothing. Then he glanced at the canyon walls, where the afternoon sun glinted occasionally off metal rifle barrels, Sarah knew, held by Apache warriors positioned in the rocks. "You have until dawn tomorrow," he said finally. "If your Apache friends aren't gone by then, I'll have no choice but to fulfill my orders, Judge's daughter or not." Relief made Sarah's knees weak, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you, Lieutenant." Hollister remounted, gathering his reins. "I hope you know what you're doing, Mrs. Mitchell. These people aren't like us. They don't think like us." Sarah thought of Red Sky's gentle hands with her children, of Grey Dove's healing knowledge, of Swift Arrow's transformation from enemy to protector. "Perhaps that's exactly why I choose to stay with them," she replied softly. The lieutenant shook his head in resignation before wheeling his horse and leading his company away. Sarah watched until the last soldier had disappeared down the canyon, then sank to her knees, trembling with delayed reaction. That was how Red Sky found her moments later, kneeling in the dust, tears of relief streaming down her face. He knelt beside her, gathering her into his arms with infinite tenderness. "Oh, you did what no warrior could have done," he murmured against her hair. "You won a battle without bloodshed." "He's given us until dawn," Sarah managed through her tears. "We need to be gone by then." Red Sky helped her to her feet, his arm steady around her waist. "We will be. My father already prepares to move north, to the lands of our allies, the Crow." He gazed down at her, wonder in his eyes. "You are coming with us." "Truly?" Sarah raised her hand to his face, tracing the proud line of his cheekbone with gentle fingers. "My home is with you now, Red Sky, you and our children." His expression softened at the word "our," and he pressed his lips to her forehead in a gesture more intimate than any kiss. "Then let us go home, Sarah Mitchell." 5 years later. The summer sun bathed the Crow encampment in golden light as children's laughter rang across the valley. Sarah sat outside her lodge, deftly weaving a basket of willow branches while keeping one eye on her boisterous brood. The triplets, now sturdy 5-year-olds, played among the other children of the band, their language a fluid mixture of English, Apache, and Crow. James I, the most adventurous, led a game of chase. His dark hair, so like his mother's in color, so like Red Sky's in texture, streaming behind him as he ran. Thomas, thoughtful and observant, sat nearby with the son of Grey Dove, carefully constructing a miniature lodge from twigs and bark. Mary, her father's daughter in spirit as well as in name, practiced with a tiny bow that Swift Arrow had carved for her last winter solstice. And toddling among them, closely watched by her older siblings, was little Morning Star, her copper skin and blue eyes a perfect blend of her father and mother. Born during the first winter with the crow, she had entered the world surrounded by family, Grey Dove serving as midwife, Chief Grey Wolf blessing her first cry, the triplets solemnly examining their new sister with wide-eyed wonder. Red Sky emerged from their lodge, his face painted for the council meeting that would begin at sunset. 5 years among the crow had elevated him to a position of respect and influence, second only to his father. The band had grown, absorbing other Apache families, fleeing the reservations, creating a community that honored the old ways while adapting to the changing world. He paused to drop a kiss on Morning Star's head as she wobbled toward him on unsteady legs. The gesture, so casually affectionate, still warmed Sarah's heart. This warrior, who had once killed 4 men without hesitation, now approached fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to battle, wholehearted, unflinching, and with absolute devotion. "The messenger from Fort Benton brings news," he said, settling beside Sarah. "The new Indian agent seeks peace talks with all tribes in the territory. He has invited representatives to a council next moon." Sarah nodded, setting aside her basket. "Will you go?" "My father thinks I should." Red Sky's fingers entwined with hers, a habit formed over years of partnership. "He says my knowledge of the white man's words makes me valuable at such talks." "He's right," Sarah agreed. "You understand both worlds." Red Sky's gaze swept over their children, playing freely under the open sky. "As do they, thanks to you. They will need this understanding in the years to come." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly, "bringing a white woman into your world? Creating children who belong to both sides of a divided land." Red Sky turned to her, his dark eyes solemn. "The Great Spirit does not create by accident, Sarah Mitchell. You were meant to wait in that cabin with 3 newborns. I was meant to follow Blackwood's trail to your door, and we were meant to build this life together." He touched the scar on his shoulder, legacy of the bullet he had taken defending her. "Every path led to this place. How could I regret what was written in the stars before our birth?" Sarah smiled, thinking of the lonely widow she had been, and the woman she had become. Wife, mother, healer, bridge between worlds. She had learned the Apache ways. Just as Red Sky had embraced aspects of hers, their children grew strong in body and spirit, inheritors of 2 traditions, 2 histories, 2 futures. "And no regrets," she agreed, watching as Swift Arrow, now a trusted friend and fierce protector of all her children, showed Mary how to improve her bow grip. "Only gratitude." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Chief Grey Wolf emerged from his lodge. Though his hair had grown fully white and his step had slowed, his bearing remained regal, his eyes sharp. He made his way toward them, stopping to ruffle James's hair and accept a small gift of stones from Thomas. "My son," he greeted Red Sky. "My daughter," he added, inclining his head to Sarah with the respect one warrior accords another. "The council fire is being lit," Red Sky nodded, rising to his feet. Before joining his father, he bent to kiss Sarah once more, a gesture that still raised eyebrows among the more traditional elders, but was accepted as the way of the chief's son and his unusual wife. "I will return with the moon," he promised. Sarah watched him walk away with his father, the 2 men speaking in low voices as they moved toward the council circle. 5 years ago, she had stood alone on a porch, clutching 3 newborns as violence approached her door. Now she sat among a people who had become her own, surrounded by children who would carry forward the best of both their heritages. The impossible love born in blood and danger had blossomed into something neither she nor Red Sky could have imagined that fateful day. A family bridging two worlds and perhaps, in their small way, helping to heal the divisions of a wounded land. As darkness fell and the triplets returned to the lodge, tired from play and hungry for the evening meal, Sarah gathered them close, along with little Morning Star. Together, they watched the first stars appear in the twilight sky, ancient lights that had witnessed countless human stories and would witness countless more. But Sarah knew that few of those stories could match the one that had brought her here, the widow with newborn triplets and the Apache warrior called Red Sky, who had saved each other in ways that transcended mere survival. Their story, like the stars themselves, would continue shining long after they were gone, carried forward in the blood and memories of the children who embodied their improbable, undeniable love.